The first sign that something was wrong came on a quiet Tuesday morning. Dr. Nathan Cole was sitting at his desk in the Climate Research Center in Silver Spring, Maryland. He had a cup of coffee in his hand and a screen full of numbers in front of him. The numbers were supposed to be ordinary. They were not. The global temperature had dropped by 2.5 degrees overnight. Nathan put his coffee down. He looked at the number again. He checked the sensor network. He checked the backup sensors. He refreshed the page 3 times. The number stayed exactly where it was, sitting there on the screen like a stone that had no business being on that particular road. A drop like this did not happen. Not without a reason. Not without a volcano throwing millions of tons of ash into the sky, or a massive shift in ocean currents that scientists would have been tracking for months. Nothing in the system had flagged any warning. No alerts, no alarms, no unusual readings from the satellite array. Just a number that was wrong by every rule Nathan had spent 19 years learning. He called his colleague Louise Farr at the Goddard Space Flight Center. She picked up before the second ring. "Tell me you are looking at what I am looking at," Nathan said. 2.6 on my end, Louise said. Her voice was very calm, which was how Nathan knew she was frightened. "And it is still dropping." Nathan stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the street looked like any other October morning. A few cars moved slowly through traffic. A woman walked her dog past the parking lot. The sky was the usual flat gray of autumn. And nothing looked wrong. Everything felt wrong. By the time he got back to his desk, the number had moved again. He called in his team. Within an hour, the crisis room was full, and within 2 hours, every major climate center in the world had confirmed the same thing. The temperature was not just dropping in one region, it was dropping everywhere, all at once, at the same rate, in a pattern that no weather system in the history of the planet had ever produced. Snow began falling in Miami at 3 in the afternoon. Nathan watched the report come in on the feed. Miami. Snow. He read the words twice, and they still did not feel like real words. He thought about the models his team used, the careful layered systems of cause and effect that predicted how weather moved across the planet. None of those models had a column for this, and none of them had an answer. He pulled up a blank document on his screen and started writing down what he knew, which was not very much, and what he did not know, which was almost everything. The temperature kept falling. By nightfall, the reading had moved past 4 degrees below baseline. Reports were coming in from shipping companies in the North Atlantic about unusual ice forming in water that had been clear for decades. A research station in northern Canada reported that their outdoor thermometers had gone past their lowest measurement point. Farmers in Georgia were waking up to find their fields white. The president was on the phone with other world leaders. Nathan knew this because his director called him twice to ask for briefings, and both times Nathan had to say that he did not have answers yet, only questions. And more questions were arriving faster than his team could write them down. He stayed at his desk through the night. At some point, Louise called again and said that she had been looking at the satellite imagery and that there was something strange about the way the cold was spreading. It was not radiating outward from any single point the way a natural event would. It was appearing everywhere at the same moment, as though the cold had no source at all, as though the planet had simply decided, all at once, to become colder. "That is not how physics works," Nathan said. "I know," Louise said. "That is why I am calling you." He told her to send him everything she had. Then he turned back to his screen and kept working. Far above all of this, in a place that no human eye had ever found and no human instrument had ever detected, and a being called Vorath 7 stood at a wide, curved window and looked down at the blue and white shape of Earth turning slowly in the dark. Vorath 7 was an observer. That was his role, his purpose, the thing he had been doing for 4 decades without interruption. He worked for an organization called the Celestine Concordat, which was a collection of many different species spread across a large portion of the galaxy. And his job was to watch Earth and file reports about what the people on it were doing. He had filed a great many reports. The humans were interesting. Not powerful, not advanced, not particularly impressive by any of the standard measurements the Concordat used to evaluate a civilization, but they were strange in a way that was hard to describe in report language. They kept doing things that the models said they should not be able to do. They kept surviving situations that the models said they should not survive. Vorath 7 had noted this in report after report, and the Concordat had noted his notes and moved on, because Earth was not a priority. Earth was a minor entry in a very long catalog, scheduled for eventual formal contact in roughly 200 years. That schedule, Vorath 7 was now beginning to think, was going to need some adjustment. Because his instruments were telling him something that made no sense by any standard he had ever learned. The cold spreading across the planet below was not coming from the atmosphere. It was not coming from space. It was coming from inside the planet itself, rising up from somewhere deep in the rock and the iron and the ancient compressed layers of Earth's interior. Something down there had turned on. Vorath 7 had seen thermal readings from hundreds of planets in his career. He had seen ice ages and volcanic winters and solar events and catastrophic asteroid impacts. He knew what natural cold looked like, and this was not it. This was structured. This was deliberate. This was the signature of a device, not a disaster. He sent an alert to the Concordat High Chamber. Then he turned back to his window and kept watching, because that was what he did, and because something told him that whatever was going to happen next was going to happen fast. Below him, on the surface of the freezing planet, Nathan Cole opened another blank document and started writing down a new list of questions. Yeah, he did not know anyone was watching. He did not know the cold had a source deeper than any drill had ever reached. He did not know that the night he was living through was going to change the history of his entire species. He just knew the temperature was still dropping and that someone had to figure out why. So he kept working. The Meridian Gray was a research ship, and it was a good one. But it had not been built for what the weather was doing now. Dr. Dara Voss stood on the deck in a heavy survival suit and watched the sea around the ship turn a strange gray color that was not quite ice and not quite water, something in between that moved sluggishly and caught the pale light in a way that made her uneasy. They were anchored off the Greenland coast. 11 days into a drilling project that had been planned for months and had nothing to do with the global temperature crisis that was now filling every news broadcast she could reach on the satellite connection. Or at least, it had nothing to do with it until this morning. This morning, her team had pulled up something that should not exist. Owen Park was 26 years old and had been working with Dara for 8 months. He was careful, precise, and not the kind of person who sat down hard on the floor of the lab for no reason. But that was what he had done 20 minutes ago, after running his first set of readings on the core sample from 4 kilometers down. He had looked at his instruments, and then he had sat down on the floor, and he had not said anything for a while. Dara crouched beside him. "Owen, tell me what you found." He looked up. His face was pale in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. "The sample is pulling heat out of the air," he said. "What do you mean, pulling?" "I mean it is not just cold. It is not just failing to conduct heat the way ice does. It is actively taking thermal energy out of the surrounding environment. I ran the measurement 4 times. The same result every time. This material is absorbing heat from everything around it." Dara looked at the containment box on the lab table. It was a standard insulated case, the kind they used for samples that needed to be kept stable. The outer surface of the case had a thin layer of frost on it. While she watched, the frost thickened slightly. "How much heat is it taking?" she asked. "As much as it can get," Owen said. I put a temperature probe inside the inner containment layer. It read -71, and it was still going down. That was 10 minutes ago. I have not checked it again because I am not sure I want to know." Dara stood up slowly. She walked to the porthole and looked out at the gray water. She had heard the emergency broadcasts. She had heard about the snow in Miami and the ice forming in the North Atlantic and the temperature readings that were breaking every record anyone had ever kept. She had assumed, the way everyone on the ship had assumed, that whatever was happening out there was some large weather event, some complex atmospheric pattern that the meteorologists would work out eventually. She was starting to think the meteorologists were looking in the wrong place. "What depth did this come from?" she asked. 4,012 meters, Owen said. "Below the standard Holocene layers, below the glacial deposit layers, below everything we mapped before we started drilling. We were not expecting to find anything unusual at that depth. We were just doing a routine core extension. And the material itself. What does the spectrometer say it is made of?" Owen got up from the floor and pulled up the reading on his screen. He pointed at a series of lines that Dara looked at for a long time. The lines did not correspond to any element or compound in the reference library. The spectrometer had essentially looked at the sample and reported back that it did not know what it was looking at, which was something that spectrometers were not supposed to do. "Get me NOAA on the satellite link," Dara said, "and the Geological Survey Office. And anyone else who is relevant. Do not open that containment box." Owen nodded and moved to the communications station. Dara stayed at the porthole for a moment longer. Someone had put that thing down there. That was the thought that kept arriving in her mind, and that she kept trying to set aside, because it was not a scientific thought. It was the kind of thought that belonged in a film, and not in a research vessel off the Greenland coast. But the geological layers did not lie. Whatever that material was, it had been at that depth for a very, very long time. Long before there were people with drills. Long before there were people at all. She turned away from the window and went to help Owen with the communications. In the concorded emergency session, the atmosphere was what Vorath 7 could only describe as controlled panic. If 42 species were represented, and all of them had seen his alert data, and all of them were now looking at the temperature readings from Earth with expressions or body postures or chemical signals, depending on their biology, that communicated the same thing. This is not what we expected. The Velhari ambassador, who was one of the oldest beings in the chamber and had participated in more first contact events than anyone else present, opened the session by displaying the thermal data in a format every species could read. The room went quiet. "A Class 4 thermal absorption array," said the Dravashi representative, who came from a world that had experienced 4 ice ages and understood cold in a way most species did not. "That is the signature." "Yes," said Vorath 7. Which means this is not a natural event." The room got quieter. A Class 4 thermal absorption array was not something that most civilizations could build. It was not something the Concordat itself could currently build, though the theoretical principles were understood. It was a device that operated at a level of technology the Concordat classified as the 3rd tier, which was a polite way of saying that the beings who made it were operating well beyond anything the current member species could replicate. "Someone built this and put it inside that planet," the Velhari ambassador said slowly. "Yes, a long time ago, and something the humans did recently caused it to activate." "The humans did not build it," said another representative. "No," Vorath 7 said. "They did not, but they live on the planet where it was buried. And right now it is freezing their world, and they do not know why, and they do not know we exist. And they are down there trying to figure it out on their own." The chamber was very quiet now. "What are they doing?" the Velhari ambassador asked. Vorath 7 pulled up his observation feeds and shared them with the room. Screens filled with images from the surface. Scientists at their desks through the night. Emergency teams driving through snowstorms. People in cities that had never seen winter like this, wrapping themselves in whatever they could find and keeping moving. "They are working," Vorath 7 said. "That is what they do." The Velhari ambassador looked at the feeds for a long time. Then she said that the High Chamber needed to convene a full session immediately, and that the situation on Earth needed to be reclassified from minor observation to active priority. Nobody argued with her. Back on the Meridian Gray, Owen had gotten NOAA on the line, and Dara was explaining what they had found, and the person on the other end was very quiet for a moment before asking her to repeat the depth and the absorption readings, and then was quiet again. "We will get people on this immediately," the voice said. "Good," Dara said. "Because whatever this is, it is getting colder in that containment box, and the box is rated for conditions we should not be seeing." She looked at the frost on the outer case, which was now a centimeter thick and still growing. "Figure it out fast," she said. The cold did not stop. That was the thing about it. Every morning, people woke up hoping that the numbers had leveled off, that the temperature had stabilized, that the worst was over, and the long, slow climb back to normal could begin. Every morning, the numbers had moved further down. 3 weeks into the freeze, the global average temperature was 11 degrees below where it had been on that first Tuesday morning. The Northern Hemisphere was locked in winter conditions that had not existed in any living person's memory. The Southern Hemisphere, which had been heading into spring, was instead heading into cold that nobody there had prepared for. But the cold did not stop the people either. In Chicago, there was a man named Calvin Reed who worked for the city water department. Calvin was not a famous person. He was not a scientist or a general or a politician. And he was a practical man who understood pipes and pressure and what happened to old infrastructure when the temperature dropped fast. What was happening in Chicago was that the pipes were in danger, the old ones that ran under the oldest parts of the city. And if they froze and burst, hundreds of thousands of people would lose water in conditions where losing water was a very serious problem. Calvin organized a team. He called in every favor he had. He stood outside in temperatures that dropped to -30 and talked to people and convinced them to help. And within 2 days, he had 400 volunteers working in rotating shifts, manually wrapping the most vulnerable sections of the water main network in insulating material. They worked through nights that were so cold that the air itself seemed to crackle. And they passed thermoses of hot soup down the line. They talked and sang badly to stay awake. They did not stop until the work was done. The pipes did not freeze. In the Philippines, the fishing communities along the coast watched their waters turn gray and slow and strange and understood very quickly that the fish were going deep, away from the cold surface, and that the usual way of doing things was not going to work anymore. A group of older fishermen sat together for a day and talked it over, and what they came up with was not a complaint or a request for help from the government, though they filed those too. What they came up with was a plan to convert their flat-bottomed boats into floating greenhouses. They hauled soil from inland farms. They stretched plastic sheeting over wooden frames. And they planted cold-hardy crops that could grow in low light, and within 2 weeks the first small harvests were coming in, not enough for everything, but enough for something, which was better than nothing. A 16-year-old girl named Priya Ose, who lived in Nairobi and who had earned a scholarship to study engineering by working harder than almost anyone around her, wrote a paper on her personal blog. The paper was about using the natural heat from the ground, geothermal energy, to supplement urban heating systems in cities that had not been designed for this kind of cold. She wrote it clearly, in language that anyone could follow, with diagrams that she drew herself. The blog post was shared 40,000 times in the first day. It was translated into 19 languages in the first 3 days. The modified versions of her design were being tested in 7 cities by the end of the first week. Priya did not know any of this was happening at first. She found out when a city engineer in Seoul sent her an email asking if she would be willing to get on a video call and answer some questions. She said yes. In a monastery high on the Tibetan plateau, where the monks had lived with extreme cold for generations and had developed careful methods for surviving it, A steady flow of people began arriving from lower elevations. They came in small groups and large ones, families and strangers, people who had no other place to go and no other idea what to do. The monks took them all in. They taught them how to conserve body heat, how to sleep together for warmth without losing dignity, and how to eat in ways that kept the body's internal temperature stable, how to keep the mind calm when the conditions were frightening. The monastery became something between a school and a shelter and a community that had not existed the week before. Vorath 7 watched all of this from his post above the planet. He watched it with instruments, and he watched it with the closest thing he had to simple attention, which was the feeling of needing to look even when there was no data point to record. He filed a report that was longer than any he had written before. He wrote about Calvin Reed and the pipes. He wrote about the fishing boats and the greenhouses. He wrote about Priya Ose's blog post and the 7 cities. He wrote about the monastery. He wrote about hundreds of other things he had observed. Smaller moments that were individually unremarkable, but that together formed a pattern he felt was important. The pattern was this: the humans were not waiting. They were frightened. They were cold. Their systems were struggling, and some of them were failing. People were suffering in real and serious ways, but they were not sitting still, and they were not waiting for someone to come and fix things for them. They were moving, adapting, sharing, inventing, arguing, and moving again. Every time one approach failed, 3 other approaches appeared to replace it. Every time a resource ran short, someone found a way to make a different resource go further. Vorath 7 had observed 41 other civilizations in his career. He had watched them face crises of various kinds. Some had collapsed, some had stagnated, some had managed, and with difficulty, to hold on until outside help arrived or conditions changed on their own. Very few had responded the way the humans were responding now, and none of those few had done it with so little technology to work with. He sent the report to the High Chamber with a note attached. The note said, in the formal language of concordant communication, that he believed the standard assessment of this civilization's capacity was significantly incorrect and that he recommended an immediate review of the contact timeline. The High Chamber acknowledged his report and told him that the situation was being reviewed. He turned back to his window. Nathan Cole had also not stopped. He had gone home once in 3 weeks for 4 hours to sleep in an actual bed and change his clothes. He had eaten most of his meals at his desk. He had drunk more coffee than was reasonable and had made peace with that fact. The crisis center had expanded again. There were people in the hallways now, sitting on folding chairs with laptops, connected to research teams in 15 countries. The noise level was constant, a steady low hum of voices and keyboards and the particular frequency of people working very hard on very difficult problems. Nathan moved through it like a man who had learned to navigate a river, not fighting the current but using it, pulling the right information at the right moment, pushing it toward the people who needed it. He did not have answers yet, but he was getting closer to the right questions, which was often how it started. He poured another coffee and got back to work. The signal had been there for 70 years. And that was what Louise told Nathan when she appeared at his desk at 3 in the morning with a printout and a look on her face that he had never seen before, a look that was somewhere between amazement and the kind of careful blankness that people put on when they need a moment to decide how to feel about something enormous. The Deep Space Monitoring Array had caught it. Not because anyone had been looking for it specifically, but because someone had written a new algorithm 3 months ago, a tool designed to sift through background electromagnetic noise for patterns that were too regular to be natural. And the algorithm had been running quietly in the background of the No-A system. And tonight, it had flagged something. The signal was coming from 400 kilometers above the Greenland ice cap. It had been broadcasting continuously on a frequency that human technology had never used and had not, until recently, known to look for. The algorithm had analyzed its structure and reported that it was not random noise. It had a grammar. It had a repeating logic. It was, without any reasonable doubt, a deliberate transmission. Nathan read the printout twice. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. 70 years, he said. At minimum, Louise said. Probably longer. That is just as far back as we have data to check. So while we were down here, someone up there was watching us. That is what the data says. He sat with this for a moment. The crisis center hummed around him. Screens showed temperature readings from around the world, all of them still wrong, all of them still moving in the wrong direction. Owen Park had flown in from Greenland and was working at a station across the room. Dara Voss was on satellite link from the Meridian Gray. 12 other researchers were at desks or on phones or hunched over data that none of them fully understood yet. Nathan thought about all of this. Then he thought about the fact that somewhere above the Greenland ice, someone had apparently known they were here for at least 70 years and had said nothing. He pushed that thought to one side. There would be time for it later. "What is the status on the decryption team?" he asked. "Working. The signal has a mathematical structure. It is not like any encoding we have in the library, but it is consistent, and the team thinks they can crack the underlying grammar if they have enough time." "How much time?" "They said a week. I told them to try for 3 days. Nathan nodded. "Tell them to, and get me Dara on the main screen. I want everything she knows about that sample from the ice." The decryption team took 58 hours. Nathan considered this almost miraculous, and said so. And the team lead, a quiet woman named Grace Nolan, said that it helped that whoever had built the encoding system had used a mathematical foundation that was, at its deepest level, the same mathematics that nature used, which meant that the human mind, shaped by nature, had certain intuitions that turned out to be useful. Nathan told her that was a beautiful way to put it and that she should get some sleep. Grace said she would sleep after they sent a reply. The reply was Nathan's idea and also his responsibility. He sat with Louise and Owen and Dara, who was still on satellite link with the sound of wind against the ship's hull audible behind her voice, and they worked out what to say. It took 2 hours of argument, which Nathan thought was actually remarkably fast given the circumstances, and in the end, the message was simple. It said, "We know you are there. We know you are watching. We want to talk. But first, tell us about the device. Tell us what it is and how to stop it. Our people are working on this already, but if you have information that can help them, share it now. We can talk about everything else later." He read it back to the group. Dara, from the satellite link, said that she liked it. Owen said it was possibly the most important thing ever transmitted by a human being and that he felt the occasion called for something more poetic. Nathan said that 7 billion people were cold and he was not in the mood for poetry. He sent the message. The reply came back in 4 hours and 20 minutes. The translation algorithm processed it through 3 iterations before Grace was satisfied with the result, and then she called Nathan to the screen, and he read it standing up because he had been sitting for so long that his back ached. The message said, "We are aware of your situation. We have been attempting to understand its cause. We know that you have suffered, and we are sorry for the time it has taken us to reach out. We are ready to share everything we know. Please confirm that you are able to receive a large amount of technical data." Nathan read the word sorry and stayed with it for a moment. They had apologized. If beings that had been watching humanity for at least 70 years, beings with technology that had gone undetected by every instrument on Earth for that entire time, beings who presumably had no obligation to help at all, had apologized for the delay. He filed this away as something to think about later and typed back, "Yes, send everything." In the concordant emergency session, Vorath 7 read the human reply aloud to the chamber. He read it in the original encoding and then in the translated form, and the chamber was quiet when he finished. The Velhari ambassador had lived for 9 centuries. She had been part of 37 first contact events. She was not an easy being to surprise. "They did not ask who we are," she said. "No," said Vorath 7. "But they did not ask if we mean them harm." "No. Their first question was about the device. Their first concern was stopping the cold." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "They have been freezing for 3 weeks, and their first instinct is to ask for technical data, not reassurance." "That is correct." The Velhari ambassador looked around the chamber. Then she said, "Send them everything. Full technical disclosure immediately. No delays, no committee review, no staged release. Send it all now." Several voices rose in objection. Protocol required a phased approach. Protocol required assessment of risk. Protocol had 17 steps before full technical disclosure. She overrode them all. "They are already building solutions without us," she said. "If we hold back now, they will solve this on their own, and they will remember that we waited. We do not want to be the beings they remember as the ones who waited. Send the data." The data was sent. On the Meridian Gray, Dara watched the transfer come in on her screen. The file size counter kept climbing. It climbed for a long time. She poured herself a cup of tea and started reading. The data package from the Concordat was so large that the NOAA servers rejected it at first. The firewall flagged it as an attack and shut the connection down, and there was a frantic 20 minutes while a technician named Barry Cho manually overrode every protective layer in the system to let it through. When it finally landed in the servers, it sat there like a strange mountain, enormous and full of things that nobody yet knew how to read. Translation took 4 days. Understanding took longer. The device, the Concordat documents explained, I was called a stasis anchor. It had been placed inside Earth approximately 400,000 years ago by a civilization called the Elurath. The Elurath were gone now, disappeared from the galaxy in a way that the Concordat's own records did not fully explain, but they had left things behind on various planets, these anchors, buried deep in the geology of worlds they considered worth preserving. The idea behind the anchor was not cruel. It was, in its own way, a gift. The Elurath had believed that civilizations sometimes reached moments of crisis so severe that they needed time, a pause, a reduction in the pace of everything, so that the damage could be slowed and addressed. The anchor was designed to create that pause by lowering the planet's temperature dramatically, forcing a slowdown and giving the civilization time to rethink whatever it had been doing that had brought it to the edge. The trigger conditions were specific. The anchor was designed to activate when it detected a particular combination of electromagnetic signals, the kind that the Elurath associated with civilizations that had reached a critical level of technological development. The assumption was that any civilization advanced enough to trigger the anchor would also be advanced enough to understand what the anchor was and how to turn it off. The humans had triggered it with 8 billion smartphones, a global internet, and a satellite communications network that had been growing for 60 years. Dr. Dara Voss explained this to the International Crisis Committee via satellite link, speaking carefully and watching the faces on the screens around her. There were presidents and prime ministers and generals and scientists, and she watched them absorb the information one piece at a time. When she finished, the committee chair, a man named Art Quinlan, who had spent 30 years in the military and had a manner of absolute unflappable calm that Dara found very comforting in this particular moment, looked at his notes and said, "So we activated an alien climate control system by having too many phones." "That is one way to put it," Dara said. "And the beings who built it are gone, and the beings who told us about it are currently sitting above our planet, and we need to figure out how to switch it off." "Yes." Art looked at his notes again. "All right," he said. "How do we do that?" The answer required 3 weeks of work that was unlike anything any human team had attempted before. But the Concordat provided the theory. A being named Vorath-7, who had been watching Earth for 40 years and who turned out to look nothing like what any of the humans had imagined, came down to the surface for the first time and stood on the Greenland ice in a suit designed to protect him from conditions his biology found uncomfortable, and met Nathan Cole face to face. Nathan offered his hand. Vorath-7 had read enough about human customs to understand the gesture, and he took the hand and shook it. It was awkward in the way that truly important moments usually are. No music, no ceremony, no crowd, just two people standing in the cold, meeting for the first time, trying to solve a problem together. "You have been watching us for 40 years, Nathan said. "Yes," Vorath-7 said. "And you did not say hello." "No, I'm sorry for that." Nathan looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "We can talk about it later. Right now I need you to walk me through the interface specifications for the anchor's primary resonance layer, because my engineering team has a question about the phase calibration, and your documents are not clear on that point." Vorath-7 looked at him. Then he said, "Yes, let us do that." The engineering work spread across 11 sites around the globe. Signal emitters had to be built from scratch, using concordant blueprints translated into materials and methods that human factories could actually produce. Teams in countries that had barely spoken to each other in decades found themselves sharing components and schematics and working around the clock in conditions that were brutal and getting worse. There was a moment, 48 hours before the final activation, when everything seemed to be going backward. The anchor's output was increasing instead of decreasing, and the global temperature took a sudden sharp drop that sent the crisis centers into a controlled panic. Nathan looked at the data and could not find the problem. Dara looked at it and could not find it either. Vorath-7 looked at it and said that there was a phase error somewhere in the signal network, but that he could not identify where. Owen Park found it. He had been awake for 31 hours when he sat down with the calibration logs from the Greenland emitter station and went through them line by line. He found the error at 4 in the morning, a small mismatch in the timing sequence that was producing interference across the whole network. He fixed it by hand, using tools he had improvised from equipment on the drilling rig, because the proper tools had not arrived yet, and he was not willing to wait. He called Nathan to report that the fix was in. Nathan told him to sleep. Owen said he would sleep after. The anchor went dark over the course of 3 days. Not all at once, but in stages, region by region, like a fever breaking slowly across a very large and very tired body. The sea ice began to retreat. The temperature began to climb. The snow in places that had never seen snow melted slowly under skies that were starting, very gradually, to return to their usual color. In the concordant high chamber, Vorath-7 presented his final report on the event 4 months after the thaw. And it was the longest report he had ever written, and it contained the most detailed observation record he had ever compiled. He documented everything. Calvin Reed and the pipes, Priya Osei and the 7 cities, the fishing boats turned into greenhouses, the monastery on the plateau, the decryption team that had cracked the concordant signal encoding in 58 hours without any outside help, the moment when Nathan Cole had received news of alien contact and set it to second priority because the planet needed saving first. He presented all of it to the chamber, and then he said that he wanted to revise his assessment of humanity's development timeline. The Velhari ambassador asked him what he wanted to revise it to. "They are ready now," Vorath-7 said. "They have been ready for some time. We were the ones who were not prepared for them." Nobody in the chamber argued with him. Nathan Cole went back to his office in Silver Spring. The October sky outside his window looked the same as it always had. He sat down at his desk and opened his laptop and looked at the temperature reading from the global sensor array. It was normal. Just a number, sitting quietly on the screen, being exactly what it was supposed to be. He stayed with that for a moment. He let himself feel it. Then he picked up his phone and called Louise. "It is done," he said. "I know," she said. I am looking at the same number. We should write a paper. Nathan, we need to write at least 15 papers, possibly a new branch of science. We will start with one, he said, one thing at a time. He hung up. He turned to his whiteboard, that which was covered in diagrams and calculations from the long weeks of the crisis, and in the bottom corner, in small, careful letters, he wrote a short note to himself. It said, "We were here. We stayed. We fixed it." He capped his pen. Outside, the pigeons were back on the telephone wire. The mail truck was at the curb. The world was cold in the ordinary way of late autumn, which was the best kind of cold there was. He opened a new document and started writing.